about. Right, it's time now for the Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.
Well, joining us this morning, I'm delighted to say, are Jonathan Gibson and also Reem. Ibrahim, good morning to the two of you.
Good morning.
Very nice to see you both in the studio. Let's start, if we can, with CPTPP, because I'm slightly obsessed by this. We think it's not a very sexy name. No. Now, obviously, this is this new trade deal. Britain has joined the 11-member-strong Asia-Pacific trade bloc, including Japan and Australia. This has taken 2 years to negotiate, and this is very much part of the post-Brexit arrangement. So it spans Canada, Mexico, Japan, Australia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and it's expected it will be ratified by the UK Parliament and the other member states later this year. Now, yesterday, there was a lot of talk from people who were less than keen to say, well, actually, it will generate 1.8 billion over 10 years, so in fact, it's a pretty bad deal. But that really, for me, isn't the point. And this morning, the story has moved on because Kemi Badenoch has actually attacked her own department's estimate of the economic benefits. She said she couldn't stand the stale, static, out-of-date forecast that joining the CPTPP, just adding that 0.08% to the economy. I'll come to you first, if I may, Reem. So here we've got Kemi Badenoch, who actually, and Liz Truss, I think, need to take credit for what they've done. And this is a good deal in my eyes. And she's now attacking her own department. How do you view the deal?
I think it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, this is a huge win for free trade and a huge win for Brexit, might I say. I mean, this deal wouldn't be possible if we weren't free from the shackles of the European Union. So I think it's absolutely fantastic. I've been really disappointed by the BBC coverage on this deal, actually.
None.
Well, absolutely none. Or the parts that they have been quoting have been that 0.08% figure, which, of course, we know. I mean, the Institute of Economic Affairs came out with a really good post on this on Saturday, where they sort of looked at the actual static modelling that actually does not take into account a lot of the different factors at play here. I mean, first of all, we don't know how many other countries are going to join in the future. We don't know how much of this trade is actually going to impact the UK's GDP in the short term versus the long term. But what we do know, this is a huge win for free trade and a huge win for UK businesses.
Well, Jonathan, I imagine you share some of that sentiment.
No, I do actually share some of that sentiment. I do think it is good, lowering tariffs with other countries and, post-Brexit being able to trade more freely with these other countries. But it's important to remember that we did actually have free trade agreements with 9 of those 11
Indeed.
countries. So, the only additions are Malaysia and Bahrain. Malaysia, we've got problems over palm oil and there's some tension over that issue. So that's something that needs to be considered, and also, obviously, workers' rights that are going on in some of those regions. But I agree with Reem in that there's also, much debate as to whether new countries are going to join later down the line. But I think that also could be quite a time lag before the economic benefits really start kicking in, unfortunately.
I mean, I think that's the point, isn't it? It's not really where it is now, it's where it's going, and the countries that are going to join, and also the increment in the trade. I mean, I think a number of people in Europe will be very unhappy about this.
They will be, won't they? And I think a lot of the people that sort of were maybe still holding out and hoping that we'll rejoin the European Union, rejoin the single market, are probably very upset by this deal, because this, of course, makes it all the less likely. I mean, this really is, as I said, a huge win for Brexit, because it shows that when we sort of take up these opportunities, these Brexit opportunities, we really can see more free trade.
So you make a really good point. In fact, there's a great article by John Longworth, who was an MEP with me. It was in the Express, actually, from yesterday, saying that actually the CPTPP makes it practically impossible for a future government, including Labour, to actually take us back into the EU. Jonathan?
Yes, I don't think Keir Starmer, or at least under Keir Starmer, the Labour Party would ever consider rejoining the EU, or so he said. I think, if we just take the statistics on face value, I don't necessarily agree that it would be, a static victory for the Brexiteers. I think, whilst it's certainly a good thing that we're trading with these other countries, if we simply take the economic forecast at face value, which is obviously much debated.
These are static modelling. As Kemi has said, as multiple reports have said, the problem with static modelling is that it doesn't take into account all of the multitude of factors that can occur. And also, this deal wouldn't have happened without Brexit.
No, but the problem is that we're actually unsure. There's a lot of uncertainties that are still at play, whilst the OBR has estimated that there's been a 4% effect from Brexit. So, it could be that there's a significant increase in trade, but unfortunately there's just a lot of uncertainty.
But I think there's someone's been talking a great deal about let's stop looking in the rear view EU, Miriam.
No, I agree.
We made a decision.
I completely
we're out.
agree.
And so this is a good step forward, just in terms of that. I find it really fascinating. Of course, the United States, we've been trying to get this deal with the United States done. That is off the table at the moment. The interesting thing for me is the US may well join the CPTPP.
It could be. Well, Barack Obama was actually one of the people who sort of got involved in setting up the organisation under which Donald Trump removed himself. So we'll have to see in terms of where the future...
Whether he pops up again.
Yes.
Whether he pops up again.
Yeah. Not, but
I think the important thing as well is you're never going to do a trade deal and see all of the benefits on day one. Any trade deal is the opening of the door to benefits. And if we didn't join it, we'd just be sitting, then we would be static and going backwards. So I think we're opening doors, and that's what we needed to do.
I think it's just sort of important to talk about the benefits of why free trade is so important, and why free trade over protectionist policies actually does improve competition and standards. I mean, you've got various different companies across this new free trade agreement that actually do things better, more efficiently, and it means that businesses in this country can then copy that. They have that competitive advantage. They're able to compete, and it means we drive up standards. So ultimately, for us consumers, we get better products that are probably going to be cheaper because they're more efficiently made.
But you see, there's something else that's really important for me. This is a true free trade deal without being told by a bureaucratic, kind of autocratic institution. Non-elected, very well remembered. In the I wouldn't go quite that far. I mean, I did work there, but obviously you haven't got to then toe the line and have all of the rights and responsibilities of being in the EU. This is a proper trade deal.
The exception, though, is that there is, for example, if we look at palm oil, which is, responsible for 8% of deforestation across the world, we can see, there are harms in terms of certain regulations. I think, look, if we look at, chocolates and cakes, and there's lots of other whiskey, I think was another one, cheese. I'm very excited for the price of cheese to fall.
Do you think us not being in that trade deal would stop the palm oil problem?
No, but we're directly being complicit in actually, supporting that, aiding that deforestation because we have a market. Which
or maybe we now have a say.
Yes.
But we've relaxed the tariffs that were on palm oil. So before, whilst we were in the EU, there was much higher tariffs on palm oil. So we were obviously importing less of it. By making it cheaper, we're encouraging more production.
So just on a slightly different note, there are two other points. I think. Firstly, is that the UK now has a veto, particularly over China. I think that's going to be an interesting point. And the second thing is the EU. I don't think it's inconceivable the EU would want to join the CPTPP.
Yeah, I think it
the new trade deal.
Yeah, the new trade deal.
The new trade deal.
I think it definitely represents a pivot away from Europe and towards Asia, which is, I think in the next 50 years going to become increasingly important, and we're already seeing that in terms of foreign policy. So I think that is something really to bear in mind in regards to China.
Now, does this stop the Mandelsons of this world saying that we're going to rejoin the EU? Because I think it might well do.
I hope it does, and I think actually, like as Jonathan said, this is a huge shift away from this sort of focus of the European Union. Clearly, we're showing now that we're actually very happy to trade with other countries, and I would like to see the entire world join this trade agreement. To be honest,
it will also give the message to other countries around the world that we really have divorced ourselves from the EU and we are ready to do deals. It may actually be the springboard over that vault.
But in terms of you mentioning that we're ready for every country to join that,
I would like to see every single country in the world join this trade deal,
including China.
No. Oh, okay, maybe not China. Maybe not those
But we have a veto. That was the point.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, let's leave that there. I mean, I think it's very interesting, if nothing else. I want to talk now about domestic politics. I mean, clearly there's so much turmoil. I think the last time you came on, Reem, you were saying you weren't even Conservative anymore. And actually, just going back to that point, Liz Truss actually deserves a lot of credit for that deal, by the way. And, of course, she didn't really ever get the credit that was owed to her. There's a really interesting story this morning, and I would say this, wouldn't I, in the Telegraph. This is new research commissioned by Labour, not by any other party, and it shows that Reform UK is about to steal the Tory countryside vote as it plunders the rural right ahead of the next election. It is really interesting. So basically what it says is some of the Tories' most loyal voters are so fed up with the Tories, they're actually moving to Reform UK. In fact, the Conservatives are losing 2 in every 5 of their 2019 voters. This is according to this polling by YouGov. They've only retained 58% of their voters at the last election, and 14% of their voters are now going to vote for Reform UK. It breaks it down into a number of segments, which I won't go through right now. Are we beginning to see actually a massive shift in British politics?
I think what we're seeing is clearly the Conservative Party's failure on immigration in particular has meant this party's taken a huge hit. And clearly I really like the way that they've broken up these sort of political cleavages and segments within the electorate of individuals who previously did vote Conservative in 2019 and now are predicted to not vote for Conservative, potentially vote Reform UK. I think that actually what this will actually have an effect on it sort of electorally is that we'll see a lot of those constituency seats swing to Labour, because when you're seeing these votes be lost to the Reform UK, be lost from the Conservative Party, unfortunately we live in a first past the post majoritarian electoral system, which means that essentially a lot of these votes will mean that those seats go to Labour.
Yeah, and you're right. So they split it into those rural right, those are the socially conservative, economically right-wing group. They then have the English traditionalists, where they did have a lot of support for the Conservative Party. Then you've got things like the patriotic left, that's the red wall really, and disillusioned suburban centralist liberals as well. Jonathan...
Centrist liberals.
So what are you then? So you're an affluent demographic who are based in cities in the south of England, and you're left of centre in your economic and cultural outlook. That's you.
I don't have a political box necessarily.
Or are you an activist left?
No, I'm not affiliated with any political party, any group, but I would say that, you know, in the Conservative Party, they've had Boris sort of been kicked out, they've had Liz Truss been kicked out, and Rishi obviously got in through the MPs. So through that turmoil, each of those groups who really backed those individuals have become incredibly disillusioned with the party. And so I think as a result, are definitely moving away from it.
I know that a lot of Conservatives are deeply concerned about what is happening, and particularly with Reform UK. And as you rightly say, Reem, under the first past the post system, it's very hard for Reform UK to break through at this particular point. Does it mean, Jonathan, that people do end up voting Labour? Do we then get a change of government?
I think it means that people, you know, and Labour will have a greater chance of getting in. I'm not so sure necessarily those people who have switched to Reform UK will end up voting Labour, but it will mean that because the Conservative vote is more split, Labour will potentially win those areas.
Yeah, so the more support that Reform UK get, the better chances that Labour have at getting into government, unfortunately, and that's because of the electoral system.
But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't vote the way they think.
Of course you would say that, David.
Well, I would say that, but isn't that democracy?
No, I do agree.
So let me say it, because I don't have skin in that game, as it were. I actually think the time has come in this country for people to actually put aside the worries that the two-party system creates and vote with their heart. Because if we just continue down this Labour or Conservative, because if we vote for anyone else, we'll let the other one in, we will never change politics. And they're all the same now. So, you know, be brave, hold your nose, and vote with your heart.
Absolutely, I agree. And actually, Richard said this to me once when I put this to him. Richard Tice, the leader of Reform UK, he said, "Reem, vote for what you believe in, not what you're afraid of." Yeah. And I think that's probably true.
Is that right?
Fortunately, I'm a bit hard-nosed, but I think I'm not sure that that's necessarily the easiest solution, because if you can maintain a broad coalition, then your party just has a greater chance of winning. You know, if Labour, for example, doesn't have a hard left split off and they can retain everyone, or at least the centre, for example, which Corbyn certainly lost, then, you know, they clearly have a greater chance of winning. They're doing far better.
Well, we shall see. Let's move on now to a story which has riled Renee this morning. This is about a school who has told parents that a dress is banned. That girls can't wear dresses because this is about making uniforms gender neutral. This is in Lincolnshire. They've basically been told the option to wear a red gingham dress has been removed. This is Huttoff Primary and Nursery School in Lincolnshire. They sent parents an email explaining their uniform policy was now gender neutral. And then the school suddenly realised they had such a backfiring of this, that the parents are absolutely furious about this. They then said that even though that they originally said it was to make the uniform policy gender neutral, they said, oh, actually it's not to do with that, it's to keep the cost of the school clothing down. What is going on in our schools?
This is mad. Jonathan and I actually had this conversation before we went on air, and I think it's really interesting that they completely switched their reasoning behind this, because they saw that actually the gender neutral policy with parents is not popular. Parents don't want their kids to come home and say, I don't want to dress in a particular gender specific way. I think it's awful. I mean, this idea behind cost is obviously obviously a completely stupid point. It is a moot point because essentially, if parents don't want to pay for an extra dress for summer, they don't have to. It's removing it. They can make it, or they can just wear the skirt they've been wearing over winter. I mean, or wear the trousers. That's already an option. Removing it from the or hand-me-downs. Removing it as an option does not reduce the cost. I mean, parents can make that choice for themselves. But that's clearly
not the reason. And this is just another example of how our education system has been captured by this awful, nasty, misogynistic, transgender ideology, and I'm sorry, that's what it is. And as a parent of a girl who is very gendered, she believes that girls are made of sugar and spice and boys are made of slugs and snails, and that's fine.
It's true.
That's how I was brought up. It didn't make me hate men, and it didn't confuse me. In fact, it kept me very clear on what I was, a woman. And I think parents now are going to have to start standing up and just saying no. My daughter loves wearing a dress, but you know what? If she loved wearing trousers, that would be fine too.
So, let me ask Jonathan, do you think we're beginning to see the end of this as parents actually take back control?
I think yes, at the moment, in a sense that there's no clear policy on what, and this was a story actually a couple of days ago, the fact that Rishi Sunak is trying to formulate a policy, because right now, we've got schools doing one thing, schools in another area doing another. There's no consistency whatsoever. There's no education for teachers. Teachers, are not experts on any of this stuff. They don't necessarily know what they're doing, and as a result, you get, some ridiculous policies in certain areas and certain schools. So I think there really needs to be more education, more, standardised policy, which is carefully considered and sensible to make sure that every student is carefully thought for.
I think there's another really important point here, that women, feminists, have been fighting for 3 decades for gender to be nothing other than what you want it to be. So if women want to wear trousers, they can wear trousers. If girls want to wear skirts or football kits, they can. Now, all of a sudden, in order to satisfy the transgender fight, women wear dresses and lipstick and high heels. No, we want to wear whatever we want, and we don't want schools telling us what our girls must or mustn't wear.
It's really interesting you make that point. There is an element of this where the idea behind what a woman is has been hypersexualized, hasn't it? Because this idea that essentially, when you see a lot of these people, these individuals that do identify as transgender, they tend to propagate these sort of very anti-women stereotypes. Essentially, the high heels, the short skirts, the sort of I would say immodest, sort of less traditionally conservative way of dressing, and that is essentially they're propagating that hypersexualized definition of what femininity is, which I would say that we should fight against as women.
Two quick stories I want to move on to very, very quickly. I thought this was a really interesting story. The fact is we've got lots of older people stuck in houses that are far too big for them. We need to get them out of those houses to liberate that housing stock for younger people. Oh, hang on a minute, I'm being looked at. But I just thought this was quite interesting. Retirees should be given stamp duty cut for downsizing to move to free up more homes for families. This is according to a senior Tory, giving basically people who are older a tax incentive to actually leave a much bigger property. Would you welcome that?
I would welcome that, and I think actually what this would also do is hopefully potentially if we were to reform the pension system, the state pension system, this actually might give these people a lot more money for them to be able to live on. So if they were to downsize, they're in these huge houses, they brought up their wonderful families, and they've all moved out now, they're in these homes alone or with their partners still. Actually, if they were to downsize, they would have a significantly more amount of money for them to actually live on rather than being reliant on the taxpayer. And to enjoy life, enjoy your old age and retire. Don't stay in a big house by yourself. Live life, go on a cruise.
Indeed. I'm coming to Scary Woman in a minute. Jonathan, what would you say to
I think the whole system around, support for old people is slightly screwed over in that, for example, there's no discrimination in pensions over income, and in terms of, you get some pensioners who their property has skyrocketed and so they're already making tons of money whilst younger people can't afford anything. So naturally, cutting stamp duty as a young person, it feels still slightly unfair because they're getting, tax benefit and we're still, struggling with very expensive housing. Having said that, if it works,
And if you liberate more capacity and therefore other families can move in, you can then hopefully own your own home. That's surely. Right, Scary Lady.
Look, I haven't got a problem with the policy as per se. I haven't. I think it's a good idea. However, I do have a problem with pressuring older people to live the homes they've lived in.
No, I agree.
Where all of their memories are, where they raised their children.
I 100%
tax
agree.
incentive is pressuring.
No, but I do think there is this view that old people living in big homes, they should move out.
But we also know that when you move elderly people, they do very badly. So
Yes.
it's important that they stay in a home they
It's
feel.
about their mental health
But
again.
it's also about their choice, and that's the point. Very quickly, one quick story, and it's really important to me because there are just 30 37 days to go until Eurovision. Britain's Eurovision entrant is a left-wing activist. May Muller, who performs I Wrote a Song, will perform that in Liverpool next month. Apparently, she is a left-wing activist, campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn, also was basically very, very rude about Boris Johnson, and said, I hate this country. Should someone like her be singing for and representing this great nation of the United Kingdom?
Absolutely not. And this is maybe where I get my social conservatism from. But this is patriotic, right? We're supposed to be incredibly grateful for the fact that we are hosting Eurovision this year, of course, as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war, which is very unfortunate. But we should be very proud of this country. We should be showing off the beauty that is the United Kingdom. And unfortunately, I think having somebody represent the United Kingdom that hates the country is not very patriotic, and I hate it.
Jonathan?
It doesn't so much bother me whether she's a left or right wing activist. It's more the extent to what she said and the lines, saying that Boris Johnson, who I very much disagree with on lots and lots and lots of things, doesn't deserve a hospital bed when he's got COVID. It's just really,
It's disgusting, and it's all part of this. Be embarrassed to be British, which I am not, and most of us, hopefully are not. But I begin to wonder.
I should think the record company are slightly nervous about this revelation, and the BBC and everyone involved with Eurovision.
Should we do it instead?
Yeah, I think we should. We'd be able to go. Or maybe all of us.
All for it. We've got a quartet ready. Let's go.
What are we wearing, though? That's the important thing.
Sequins.
Right, okay, stop now. Thank you very much indeed to Jonathan Gibson and to Reem Ibrahim. That was today's Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.
When in doubt, sequins. There we are. That's the answer. After the